knows even why some houses are called haunted.
What would you call this place?
Well, diseased, sick, crazy. Such houses are described in the Bible as lepers. Before that, a homeless race for the underworld. A house of demons.
Welcome to the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show on the Paranormal UK radio network. I'm your host, Irene Block. And as usual, my co-host today is Mark Johnson.
Are you sure about that?
Well, yes, I did have to think. I did.
Yeah.
I had to think that 1 second ahead there to get the name right.
See, I could have fooled you. I could be Christian Evers doing a bad American accent.
Who's Christian Evers?
No, not Christian Evers. Chris Delaney.
You're as bad as me.
Chris Evers, Christian Delaney, all these Chris's, Christians. I get them all confused.
Oh, well. Anyway, I have to tell you, it's somebody's birthday today.
And whose birthday today is it?
Gertie's.
Oh, it's Gertie, the paranormal pup, the official mascot of the Paranormal UK radio network.
That's it. That's her, the one that does all the work. She's the face of the radio network. And she's 3 years old. And
the biggest snorer in the background when we're doing our shows.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, she hasn't fallen asleep, but she's had a rubber ball that giggles, and she's had a bunny rabbit that squeaks, and she's had some chicken sweeties.
Oh, how nice.
She's 3 years old, And for anyone that wants to see Gertie, she's on my Facebook page. There's a picture of her when I first got her, and she was just a little bit bigger than a television remote. And I put the remote beside her when I took the photographs so that you can see how big she was.
And how many years old is she now? 3?
She's 3, Mark.
3, wow.
God, doesn't time fly?
Time really does fly.
Yeah, it certainly does. So anyway, it's raining here as usual. The winds are blowing up, and we look like we're in for a storm. What about you?
Beautiful weather, but cold. But we're supposed to be getting a really bad storm tomorrow, and the temperatures are dropping. This fall has just been incredible. It's been beautiful out here, but the leaves turned a couple of weeks early, and I just feel we're going to be in for a really hard winter.
Oh, your leaves gone now?
No, but they're past the prime, past the halfway mark.
Well, they're just beginning to turn here. Although it's been cold, I've got to admit it has been cold. But then again, where I live, it's always rainy and a few degrees lower in temperature than in London. So there you go.
Plus, you get more days without sunshine than you get with.
Well, yeah. Yeah, we get a couple of weeks of sunshine in the summer, if we're lucky.
How do you
normally?
How do you
except
keep from...
Except for the year before last, Mark, we had a heat wave, didn't we? All through the summer. The whole country had a heat wave.
Well, maybe now that when you exit the European Union, maybe you'll get some of your sunshine back. Oh,
no, more than likely we won't get any at all.
Or if you get it, it'll be overly taxed.
That's if we do exit. I don't know. They don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen. All we know, or all I know, is that he has to put in for an extension this weekend if there is nothing passed. If there is no agreement, he has to put in for an extension this weekend. That's all I know. Well, it's a mystery,
Not that we talk politics too much on this show, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens. See, I personally think I know you would prefer to stay in the European Union, but I think Britain's done a decent job of governing itself for how many hundreds of years before the
last 3 years. It hasn't been able to govern anything.
Yeah, thanks to the EU.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, well, your politicians become just as stupid as ours, so.
Yeah, I don't know whether I want to stay in now or not. It really doesn't worry me either way. But it will affect a lot of people that like to go abroad a lot. More long queues at the airport and things like that, non-EU citizen queues. But if you can tolerate that, then fair enough.
Cool. Well, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy this fall weather. Halloween is right around the corner in a couple of less than 15 days.
Are you going to do anything? Are you doing anything?
Not really. No? I haven't really done much the last couple of years.
You're not going to carve out your pumpkin?
No. It just sit on the front porch and watch, and nobody would see it because I live up on a hill and nobody comes up my driveway.
Yeah, but you'll see it.
No, I have some plastic ones I can put out instead, and they won't rot. Or we won't have the deer and bear coming up and eating it.
Nah, that's true. That's true. Well, I won't be doing anything because the grandchildren aren't down. I did buy a lot of Viennese. It's not Viennese. Venetian masks when I was out in Venice for the grandchildren, for the girls.
Ooh.
So hopefully I'll get them up to London before the Halloween and they can wear them at Halloween because they are absolutely beautiful. These masks from Venice are absolutely fantastic.
Is that the one with like the bird-like snouts on them?
Oh, no. They have plenty of them out there, but they're more for men, aren't they? These are beautiful ones with feathers and absolutely all glitter and different colours, pink, red, blues, purples. They look absolutely brilliant. I've got one.
Oh, lovely. Well, you have to take a picture of yourself and we'll put it up on the website.
Well, no, I've stuck it up on the wall.
Yeah, that's why you buy a mask, stick it on the wall.
Yeah, well, it's just a tourist thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just a trophy that I've been out to Venice this year.
Lucky you. Lucky you.
It'll end up in a box in the attic soon.
I'm landlocked this year. Maybe the next year we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But anyway, why don't we get on with the show? Should I introduce our guest?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will do that. Our guest tonight has we've spoken with this gentleman a few years ago, but we brought him back because he certainly had a lot happening in the last few years. He is a great-great-grandson to one of America's most notorious serial killers, H.H. Holmes, and he wrote a book that has been doing very well over the last few years and has now inspired its own television show, and he's been making other appearances. The book is Bloodstains, and we have the author, Jeff Mudgett, with the program. How you doing, Jeff?
Hey, Mark. I've been sitting here enjoying both of your opening statements. You're quite the duo, and your banter back and forth. I could have sitting here and just listened for a couple of hours. You guys are great.
Jeff, we normally argue. We've had fights in that early banter before now.
Or normally I would get her started by, especially on holidays like 4th of July when I remind them how we
running down the UK.
Kick the Brits out of this country, or saved your butts during 2 world wars.
Oh, yeah, only because the French helped you.
Yeah, but we have a go at each other a lot. So Jeff, thank you for coming on. And, your book Bloodstains, how long has it been out now? Because it's just continuing to have success ever since you first released it.
I think it's been out. When you say out, of course, I decided to self-publish my book rather than accept an offer from one of the publishing houses. But it's been out for 8 years now. But just to give you guys an example, we sold 17 copies yesterday. I mean, it's still doing really well.
But you've also gotten a lot more recognition for it. Now, I'll be honest with you. When your book first came out, and I came across you on social media, and I bought the book, and I read it, and I was fascinated with it because pretty much being a history buff, I'm surprised I really didn't know much about H.H. Holmes. And then reading the book and learning the sick and twisted history that he had, and your own experiences growing up being a distant relative of his. Fascinating experience. And so Before we talk about some of the newer things that have happened, if we can just recap a little bit about what made you write Bloodstains, and how did what was your thoughts growing up when knowing that you were related to this famous serial killer?
Well, let me set that straight, because what I tried to capture in the book was my experience having my grandfather tell the family his horrible secret that he'd been carrying along by himself his entire life. I mean, if he had told my grandmother who his grandfather was, this most evil man in American history, she wouldn't have married him. Okay. So I was sitting there at dinner one night. I was about 40. Grandma was doing chicken dumplings, her favorite, and we had apple pie in the kitchen waiting. And all of a sudden, grandfather decided he'd had enough, and he was going to tell the family what we all needed to help him carry. And he let loose that his grandfather and my great-great-grandfather was H. Holmes, perhaps the most evil man in American history, who had operated the murder castle during the World's Fair in Chicago in 1894.
I bet that put a stumper on the meal, didn't it?
The table went quiet.
I should think so.
It was interesting. My grandmother about lost her lunch right there. She sat back. I'll never forget her lonely stare. But what bothered me most, Irene, was the man. I was a California practicing trial lawyer, and my grandfather sometimes went to me for legal advice. But as he told this secret, he never took his eyes off mine when there were 17 other people at the table. And and I was kind of hoping he'd go off to someone else and lay it on them, but he left it just for me. And then he decided he'd had enough. He slammed his chair back against the wall. The painting crashed to the floor, and he was off, and we didn't see him the rest of the night.
So before he actually told you, had you heard of this H. Holmes? Otherwise, what was his real name? Herman Webster Mudgett. Had you heard about it?
It's a great question. No, I had no idea who he was.
You'd never heard of him before?
No, I mean,
you didn't connect anything then? No.
I knew my grandfather, and I knew he wouldn't have lied about this. He was a very quiet, stoic man he was a big shot at Pacific Gas and Electric in California. And for him to lay this on the family, I knew there was something to this. But you know what actually hit me between the eyes, Irene?
What?
My whole life, I'd known I was different. All right. I mean, I didn't.
Jeff, now.
Yeah. I didn't walk around considering murdering people or anything like that. But I knew I had idiosyncrasies that didn't match up. And to tell you the truth, I didn't know who I was. I was always questioning that. And all of a sudden, that black and white came to fruition right there at the table, and it all started to make sense. And that's when I decided I needed to chase down the legend, the lore, what was false, what was fake, to see if any of these stories were true. So, and that was 22 years ago now.
Yeah, it must have been a terrible thing for your grandfather to have to carry this secret all that time. It must have been pretty horrific for him. And when he looked you in the eyes, maybe there was something telling him in the background somewhere that you would be the one to bring the story out. And that's why he was staring at you.
Well, I have to agree with you. I think that he was being given direction to tell me the story, to put me to work on the long journey. Yeah. But
your actual feelings at the time. What were your actual feelings at the time? Besides shock, obviously it was shock, but did it frighten you?
Yes, it did. He was describing a mass murdering serial killer who had been had gone to the University of Michigan Medical School, who was highly intelligent. He could have been anything he wanted to be, and decided on a life of evil. and to say great grandson, you have some separation. Mark, you and I can joke about great grandson, but for my grandfather to talk about for his grandfather, one degree apart, it's who he never met, he never saw. You could tell he had carried this around, and it's something I wouldn't wish on any human being.
Well, you're the same bloodline, aren't you?
Direct, yeah.
Yeah. So your grandfather's father was obviously the son of Herman Mudgett, or H. Holmes, as he's better known. Which one? I know he was a con man and a bigamist. Right, which also runs in my husband's family.
Yeah, well, what about serial killing?
His uncle was a bigamist.
What about serial killing? Is that running?
Oh yeah, and a serial killer. Yeah. But from the bigamist point of view, which one was the mother of your grandfather's father? Who was the mother?
That was.
Can you remember?
Well, Clara was his mother, Herman's wife, first wife, the actual legal wife. He had four others, which...
and she left with a son. She had a son, didn't she? Henry, what was his name? Hang on a minute. I wrote it down somewhere.
Robert. It was Robert.
Yeah, Robert Lovren Mudgett or something.
Yeah, we called his mother Grandma Dot. She had... and that was the name that, the entire family used. To tell you the truth, right now, I'm at a loss to remember her official birth name, but... Lovren or something? Louran? Yes, you're right.
Because they married in 1868, didn't they? And she bore a son 2 years later.
Oh, you're talking about Herman's mother.
Clara.
Clara was his wife, Irene.
Oh, was she? Oh, I'm getting muddled up then.
Yeah, and Herman was born in 1861.
1861.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So
he was.
And you're not sure whether. Sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if that is the line that Jeffrey comes off of. That particular line, family tree, that one.
We've had the DNA all checked, and I did the DNA on American Ripper with my father when we ran it against that artifact that you English treasure, that the
family tree,
the Catherine Eddowes shawl.
Oh, that yeah. No, apron, wasn't it? Apron.
Okay, apron, shawl, and I'll let Mark help me with that. Well, what do we Americans say, Mark? Apron or shawl? I don't.
It depends. Is it going around the waist or around the neck?
Well, in them days, I think it would be around the neck.
I think around the neck kind of fits the case.
Yeah.
But that didn't match at all. So then, when we ran that down, we had Herman, Robert, Bertram, who was my grandfather, my father, Richard, and then me. It's a direct paternal line, which makes the DNA very easy to compare.
Yeah. I can just imagine that table with everyone sitting around it when the news was broken, So I bet you could cut the air with a knife.
My grandmother, she was in shock. I would imagine, and she was a tough old gal. I would have been interested in hearing the back and forth between those two after the family had left.
Oh, yeah. I expect it did cause a bit of a problem.
Yes.
There would have been a lot spoken about, and a lot of feelings would have been bashed out as well, I should imagine. Were you saying something then, Mark?
Well, I was just going to ask, between first learning of your family lineage and learning about who your great-great-grandfather was, what ultimately led you to writing a book about it?
There's a thing that we authors go through, and I don't know if people understand it so much. When someone writes a book, they're pretty much giving you an open look into their soul, their spirit, their character. And rather than run away from it, Mark, like my family had done for generations, to escape the stigma in New England and Chicago, they had all moved to California, okay, to get away from it all. And I decided that, listen, this had nothing to do with me. It wasn't a choice I was given. I wasn't going to do that. And instead, I was going to use the talents and my education to put together a story which I hope people might look into, not only to learn who I was, but also to realize what this monster had been, what he had been capable of, the intellect that he surpassed on most human beings, and then what we needed to look for to prevent another from taking his place. And that's how I tried to put the book together.
Yeah, and it's a good thing that you did as well, because it more than likely would have come out at some time into the open. So you putting the book out there, you're getting it out first.
And then what I also wanted to disclose, Irene, was that my family, that line after him, that I was growing up in a period of time when we had amateur psychologists, psychiatrists left and right, all believing that they could trace DNA and genetic characteristics on following a line. Okay. Well, here we have the Mudgetts, who are direct proof that doesn't happen that way, at least not in our case, because my grandfather, my father, my grandfather's father, none of them had ever even been arrested for jaywalking, let alone murder.
So there was no spitefulness with them whatsoever.
No, none whatsoever. And the world needed to know that.
Yeah.
Which really makes you wonder what happens to a person if something like that is not genetic. But, the person, when you're dealing with a true psychopath, someone who doesn't have the same emotions that we do, that tend to lean towards the wrongdoing and they relish in it. And yet, if we can't seem to find a genetic match to it, because otherwise it would show up in family lines. So it just fascinates me, what causes something like that? And from a paranormal researcher standpoint, which is my background, is it something, I don't want to say paranormal itself, but having to do with the spirit of the soul, the person who decided to incarnate in that body? Was there it just fascinates me to try to figure it out, what causes somebody to go so wrong.
Well, he did say, didn't he, that he had the devil standing beside him when he was born?
Well, I think you're both right on the money. That this was more than another human being. There was something there, and maybe we haven't disclosed it yet. Maybe we never will. But Irene, many newspaper accounts, and Holmes himself, the doctors that examined him, believed there was something paranormal. There was something demonic to that man, who, had he wanted to, could have been a Louis Pasteur. Instead, he wanted to hurt people and take their possessions from them. And then when they became a bothersome, a nuisance, do away with them simply.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Now, Holmes is rumored, I know when he was eventually caught and tried for, I think what was it, about 26 counts of murder that he
27
counts of murder, but yet the rumor has it that it could have been anywhere up to 200 people.
Yeah, that's a lot. And that is a lot, isn't it?
Of course, I also wanted to throw this out and get your thoughts. I don't know who edited the Wikipedia page, but man, they were totally against that theory, and they seemed to try to debunk most of the Holmes stories.
Well, he admitted to 27, didn't he?
He confessed to 27 in in an article which, if you read it carefully, it almost seems as if he's having fun doing the interview. And then the next day he pulled it back saying, come on, I was joking about that. That's not true. But the Wikipedia piece you mentioned was being written by a Chicago historian who I've long believed has his Holmes facts completely wrong. So you've got to be very careful where you come up with your theories about Holmes. I think most of the material, Irene, is from newspaper accounts at the time.
Yeah, and they exaggerate.
And from reporters who weren't even on the scene.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. And when you read like Eric Larson, The Devil in the White City, the great book about Holmes, he closes up with a footnote describing how, listen, I tried to do my best giving you the facts, but there were gaps that I filled in with creativity and imagination. But I'm still going to call it nonfiction. So once someone writes a book like that, Mark, those so-called facts run to the next author or the next Google cowboy who throws a post up, and it becomes very hard to differentiate between what actually happened and what. And I think that's probably true in most aspects of our society, literature, and Wi-Fi and social media.
Well, with Holmes himself and the things that he did, which was numerous, but what he was most famous for was his so-called murder castle there in Chicago, that hotel he built for the World's Fair, which was a house of horrors with body chutes and gas chamber. He gassed people in their rooms,
secret rooms, and
taking bodies down to the basement to dismember and sell the skeletons. I mean, he just. When I was reading the book and I was reading everything that he was doing, I'm just sitting here amazed at the things that he was able to pull off. Now, he was
clever, though. He was a con man.
But he had a lot of lawsuits against him, too. A lot of people were trying to sue him for a lot of his cons over the years.
Yeah, but didn't they, when they started closing him on these insurance scams and everything, didn't he shift his location to various places?
Well, what most people don't realize is after, when he felt the authorities closing in and that noose was tightening, to use a bad pun, the trek that he went across country was something that rivaled Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, he was running for his life from detectives for insurance companies, from law enforcement, from family members, eager to pay him back for the terrible things he'd done to their family. So it's a fascinating story. And one of the things I'm working on now is the actual trial itself, which there is a transcript for, which, having practiced trial law in California, I'm just fascinated with his firing of his lawyers, his questioning his own witnesses, even one of his wives, which the judge allowed him to do, even though it's against the rules of procedure in court. And there's just amazing back and forth between him and the judge, which finally went to an appeals court where the three judges agreed that there wasn't much evidence against him to convict for murder. But, we kind of know who this guy was. We're going to let this continue on.
Yeah. But he was highly intelligent, wasn't he?
Oh, my God,
although his parents were farmers, settlers from England. Is that true?
No, the family had come from England in the 1600s. And there's rumors that the Mudgetts were at Jamestown, one of the early settlements in America from England. And then they'd moved up north to New Hampshire, where Holmes grew up in Gilmington, a beautiful little town, which is a step back in time. Mark, if you ever get the chance, visit Gilmington and you'll see the house he grew up in, the church he attended, the elementary school he taught at. Think about that, all you mothers out there. H.H. Holmes teaching your child elementary school.
Yeah. But at that time as a child, he was just a normal child, wasn't he?
No.
Did you ever find anything like some of the children today, I've seen when there was these serial killers today, when they were children, they would get hold of animals and dissect them and do horrible things to animals.
Well, I'll give you one better than that. I'll give you a better one than that. When other kids were out fishing and hunting and playing ball, Holmes at 13 was working for an undertaker.
Oh, so he was a little bit sick then, even at 13.
He long had a fascination with cadavers, especially skeletons, which he made a business of stripping the flesh away from and articulating the skeleton and then selling them to medical schools.
Yeah, that's a bit like Air Burke and Hare over here in Edinburgh. You know, they would do that. They'd dig up the bodies and sell them to medical schools.
Or just disappear people off the street.
Yeah, they used to do that as well.
I was at a book signing. I was at a book signing in Iowa, and a gentleman came up to me and told me that he was the curator of a medical museum at the university, and that he just wanted me to know that they'd had a skeleton there for as long as he can remember, and that they were removing it from the museum because the rumor was that it had been bought from H.H. Holmes.
Oh, that's so bad.
Now, I want to bring up, because so much about what came out from Holmes, not only the book, which is a fantastic book, and I really urge people.
Bloodstains, wasn't it? Bloodstains.
Bloodstains. Yes, I urge people pick up this book. You will find it amazing. The story itself is amazing, and Jeff, your journey in discovering your ancestry and everything about your ancestor is equally as fascinating. But the last couple of years, you've had some success with the media picking up on this and getting a renewed interest in Holmes. And a couple of years ago, you had a television show called American Ripper that was based on your book, and that you got to appear in and go look deeper into the Holmes mystery.
Oh, it was a fascinating experience, and one that, I hang up there in the top 10 of my life. And to work with the production crews and the History Channel executives who, while they were skeptical, accepted my theory that Holmes was Jack the Ripper, and then spent oodles of money and actually jeopardized their reputation here in America and the UK, letting me describe that theory to the world. And I hold them in the highest regard for what they did and helped me, which was something I would have never guessed would have happened 4 or 5 years ago. Then they helped me, Mark, pursue the actual goal that I had set for myself when I first started writing the book, which was to actually exhume the alleged grave of H.H. Holmes after his alleged execution, and history backed me up on that.
And was that you? Sorry, Mark. Was that you? Was that 2017?
Yes,
that was me.
Because when he died, apparently, for any listeners listening to me, when he actually died, his neck didn't break straight away when they hung him, did they? And so they had to kind of strangle him to kill him, which took about quite a long time to kill him off. Is this correct?
There were 6, Irene. There were 6 doctors there at the hanging, and of the 6, we have the prison physician stating that the neck had been broken, that the axis and atlas vertebra had been separated, and that death had occurred because of the drop, but that the body had continued to move and blood pump. Evidently it's possible after death. I had never realized that.
No.
So when we dug him up,
but he didn't.
We dug his body.
Sorry, Jeff. Sorry. He wanted to be buried at least 10 foot down, didn't he? And he wanted cement put on top of him so that nobody could take his body. Is that true?
Well, that's what the doubters say. My My belief, Irene, is that concrete sarcophagus was because he didn't want people to finally figure out it never was him.
Oh, that's right, because he wrote in his diaries, didn't he, that he hadn't been hung.
Well,
he was still alive or something.
It's an amazing story, which the final episode of American Ripper tries to cover it, and that's the episode that I wish we had the opportunity to redo, because there was a lot of chaos and politics going on during that set, and the people that were there were in complete disagreement with me, Mark, that it wasn't H.H. Holmes. And it got angry at times, which was evident in that final episode. So when Irene, getting back to the story about the
exhumation,
neck, when we dug the body up, the University of Pennsylvania anthropologists who the court had ordered to examine the remains and identify it, they answered during the episode, my question to them was there any evidence of trauma to the neck? And both answered absolutely none.
No?
Well, no. And then we asked them, did the skeleton match? Well, they said, well, there's a 6-inch difference in the supposed height of Holmes to this skeleton, but he must have been wearing lifts on his boots.
What about his teeth? His teeth?
The teeth is an interesting aspect. The report that the UPenn anthropologists used to ID the remains was written by a physician who had interviewed Holmes before the execution in the prison cell itself.
Yeah.
In his report, there's a photograph of 2 dental casts, which the dentist at the University of Pennsylvania used to say were identical matches to the teeth of the body we exhumed. Well, we started researching those dental casts because, lo and behold, they were not taken from a living human being. They were taken from a cadaver. And this examination by Dr. Talbot, was his name, had happened when Holmes was 3 months away from execution.
So are you telling me that the body that you exhumed may not have been Holmes after all? Because 1, the neck hadn't been broken by hanging, and 2, the teeth was taken from a dead body. So could what he had written in his diaries be true, that he had got away with it and he was still alive at that time?
Irene, absolutely it wasn't him. We even had the DNA not match. So it's not him.
Yeah, now I remember watching the episode. They tried to claim in the episode the DNA did match, or that they were trying to put it to rest in the episode that it was Holmes, and then that was going to end the whole thing. And I know that you had a lot of contention over that, and there did seem to be so much conflicting evidence coming back in at the time to what was aired. I'm wondering if History Channel decided to, whether for political reasons or they had pressure to change the outcome of the episode. And I've been on a few TV shows myself, and I've dealt with some shows where the producers are very unscrupulous. It sounds like you had a better experience than I've ever had, but still, television, you don't expect them to always air the truth. They air what's marketable, or what pretty much what they're told to air.
Yeah, but what's getting me is, why did the authorities bury a complete stranger, or somebody that in the name of H.H. Holmes? Why? Was it because there was so much media? Maybe there was panic with all what was written in the newspapers at the time, that they wanted to put it all to rest?
Well, the prison authorities, Irene, believed it was Holmes who they executed and buried. They weren't part of the conspiracy, not the major mass of the prison authorities. There might have been one there that was. We're still working on that now. But I got to tell you this, Mark, when we ran when in that final episode, when history tried to squeeze the DNA in as some type of link. They didn't say it matched, but they said it was a link to my ancestor. The next day, there was a press conference involving the University of Pennsylvania anthropologists, and they both admitted that the DNA didn't match, that they were shocked to see that final episode.
Huh. Now, I'm curious. Now, you were paired up for the show with Amaryllis Fox, who is a former CIA operative. And, I'm curious, and I guess it's asking you to speak for her since she's not here, but did you ever have conversations with her after that episode aired and what her thoughts were on everything that happened?
Oh, she's one of my best friends now. We talk a lot. She's got a new book coming out that's just going bonkers on the New York Times bestseller list, from what I understand, about her life undercover in the CIA. She also just married Robert Kennedy III, so her life is on the upswing, and she was probably one of the most intelligent human beings I've ever met. She came to me the first week of production, Mark and Irene, and basically explained to me that she thought I was full of baloney, that she wasn't buying my theories about Holmes being Jack the Ripper, but that she was going to work her best with an open mind to see what happened. When the show ended, Mark, she came to me and said, "You've changed my mind. You've really changed my mind, and it was a pleasure working with you." So we had a great relationship. I'll give you guys a great scene that your paranormal listeners will appreciate. There was as we were digging that 10-foot grave up, Irene, the concrete sarcophagus emerged, and we tried to lift it out, but it was so heavy we couldn't lift it out even with the forklift machinery we had. So the scientists started breaking the concrete apart down in the grave, and as you might imagine, the odor was horrible. It was just terrible. And we still had flesh parts of the body for some reason, which the anthropologists have never explained to me satisfactorily yet.
That wasn't down to the cement, no?
No.
So as they said in the first Mummy movie, he was still juicy.
Oh.
His brain was intact inside the skull.
It didn't liquefy, because usually it liquefies.
No, and to me, there's something sinister and evil about that. But I'll let you guys come up with a reason.
Maybe he was in league with the devil then.
We still had mustache over his teeth.
Yes.
So as the director, who was an incredibly creative fellow, he turns to me and there's this crowd all gathered around the grave. It's my first exhumation. So he says, Mudgett, jump down in the grave with the scientists. I want to get shots of you digging away. And I said, I'm not getting in there. Forget you. And Amaryllis says, I'll jump in there, boss. And she jumps right down in there and starts digging away. I mean, I'll never forget.
But that smell that you're talking about is atrocious, isn't it? It is absolutely, and it hangs for a long time up your nose.
I couldn't get rid of it for 2 weeks.
I know. Oh, God, I've smelt a few dead ones in my time, and it is a very, very nasty, it just makes you gag. It is a terrible smell.
We were filming a scene at the University of Pennsylvania. They brought the body up. They cleaned it off. It was laying... The skeleton was laying on this gurney in the museum laboratory, and they were, doing their best to try to identify it with what they had. And they were all in a meeting, so I snuck off to the side. I thought about, and I know Irene's going to jump in on this, Mark. I thought about Hamlet and the Othello scene where he looks into the eyes holding the skull up in his hand and talks to his ancestor.
Oh yeah.
and at that stage, I was still 50-50 if it was Holmes or not. We hadn't come up with any evidence yet against it. So I snuck away and I went inside, and in the dark, I grabbed the skull in my hand.
You did. You did an Othello.
Yes, and I stared into those eyes and I asked the evil bastard why, and the lights came on. The director, the history executives, they're screaming and yelling at me that I'm violating contracts doing that and this and that, and told me to put it down. And as I'm putting it down, it wobbles in my hand, Mark.
Oh.
Yeah. So I tell the UPenn scientists, I say, hey, something's wobbling in my hand here. And they say, oh, don't be ridiculous, Mudgett. That's ridiculous. This is just another one of your theories. And I said, well, it just did it again. I said, it's either there's something inside moving or there's a ghost in the room. And she ran over, and she's been the head anthropologist there for 30 years, so goes to the Nobel meetings, all those stuff. She takes it out of my hand. She has a glove on, of course. And she shakes it in her hand. And she went, son of a bitch, it is wobbling. And they both ran over there. They turned it upside down, and the brain was intact.
Wow. But when you first saw him laying on the slab, or when you first saw him coming out of the ground, what were your feelings then? This was an ancestor of yours. Evil or not, he was an ancestor. Did you have any sensations, feelings?
Oh, yeah.
Were you angry or anything?
I was scared. The head of the Philadelphia Catholic Church, one of the senior, he came up to me, and this was off camera. He didn't want this at camera at all. As we were both looking down at the face looking up at us, Irene, he whispered in my ear, my son, are you sure it is, the evil you release here today? And that gave me the chills.
That would give me the chills too. Definitely. What about you, Mark?
Well, here's the thing. It would give you chills, but now there's a question on whether or not that was even Holmes.
Yeah.
So again, in one way, you could say you were looking at, the body of your ancestor, but in the other way, you're looking at who was the patsy, who was the doppelganger that was switched out and placed in, and what happened to Holmes after that.
But this is what I can't understand. If there was somebody that took his place, surely at some point or other, especially if he knew he was going to be hung for crimes that he didn't commit, why didn't he speak up?
That's a great question. The man was a member of the occult, a hypnotist. He was the greatest con that ever struck Chicago, according to the Chicago Tribune. He talked women left and right into things that no reasonable woman would have ever done. And he had assistants like Frankenstein did for his murders.
Yeah.
I don't know why someone else would have taken that place. Maybe there was, how the feds, Mark, question a witness now, and they get them to say things based on releasing them from prison for something else. Maybe Holmes had something like that on someone in the prison. Who knows?
Now, in your book, Bloodstains, you suggested fairly heavily that Holmes not only survived, but he may have even lived to a great age. That he was fascinated with being a doctor. He was fascinated with something with women's hormones and estrogen, something to do with longevity. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, I'm not an expert or a scientist on that at all, but that's what we read about what he was thinking and why he was doing these experiments in the murder castle basement. But the people that I'm working with now, Mark, on trying to run out that question that Irene just asked about this incredible escape and where he went after that, and why we didn't hear about further Holmes murders after, which I got to tell you, most amateur detectives and true crime investigators all believe that if Holmes had escaped execution that day, he would have gone on to commit other murders, which we would have seen a similar MO about. I tend to think Holmes was too smart for that, but that's their belief.
then again, Jeffrey, if he went across state, right across state, and started killing again, there was nothing like the internet or computers or television news or anything like that. There were local newspapers for those areas at the time, weren't there? So maybe no one got to hear about it.
No, it's true. It's true. And the guys I'm working with now, Irene, think he went to Europe.
Europe.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to do a bit of research, Jeff, to find out if anywhere in Europe, shortly after that time, similar murders took place.
We have a research team going on that right now with people backing us up with capital funding for the costs involved. And I think you're going to see in the next year or two, we're going to come up with something amazing. We've got a couple of breakthroughs already on aspects of the Holmes story in the States, which are going to turn the whole thing upside down. So it's a story, Mark, that I've explained it to you on Facebook. I sit and read my copy and read the comments that come in, and we find something new about Holmes every day almost.
Serial killers right now, the whole topic of them has taken on a new interest in the media. There's the Netflix series Mindhunter. I don't know if you've watched that show, which is about the FBI when they first started doing profiling of serial killers. Have you seen that show?
My favorite show.
Okay, I figured it would be, and I only watched the first season. I haven't watched the second season yet, but it always fascinates me whenever they go back and interview Ed Kemper and his whole demeanor and his attitude. Very jovial, happy to help, whatever, and yet here's the guy who had his mother's head in his refrigerator. It's the mindset of the serial killer. And then the other show that you just recently appeared on just over a week ago was Ghost Adventures, which they're doing a special 4-part series on serial killers and serial killer hauntings, and they went to one of the homes pardon the pun, one of the homes that H.H. Holmes had murdered this child in, and did this investigation. How did they contact you to get involved with that?
Well, anything Holmes now, I get contacted, Mark, by show producers to be a part of. And to tell you the truth, I'd never watched Ghost Adventures before. I knew that they were doing a miniseries about serial killers. I'd met Zach at an event, and he and I got along okay. So I figured it was worth a shot. And they were at, a house in Irvington where Holmes murdered little Howard Peitzel. And it was a house where we'd also filmed for American Ripper, and it had been an experience in my life that probably turned me toward the paranormal more than I ever thought possible, because when I was there next to the flue where Holmes allegedly put the little boy's body parts, I felt an energy, okay? And I wanted to see if I'd feel it again. And lo and behold, with Ghost Adventures and Zach Baggins, I felt it again.
So they put the boy up the chimney. He put the boy up the chimney.
They burned him.
Yeah, Holmes burned the body. Tried burning the body in the fireplace to get rid of the evidence.
Oh.
And it evidently wasn't hot enough to Holmes. Mark, I'm asked on every show I go on, how many people did Holmes murder? And I have no idea, okay? I really don't. I don't know if it was 9, it was 13, if it was 27, if it was 60. I doubt it was 200. I doubt a human being could have killed that many people in the time span we're talking about. But I can tell you this. This man was a forensic expert of the most highest regard. He was an expert at removing evidence of homicide after the crime had been committed, all right? So when bodies disappear that had been associated with this evil man. I have people saying, you can't prove he murdered that person. And I have to agree, you're right. I can't prove he murdered that person. But I got to tell you this, at some point when there's 50 people that are missing that were associated with this man, that the authorities never came up with any evidence of their whereabouts, you've got to come over to the dark side sooner or later.
Yeah, that's true. Do you believe that he I'm getting tongue twisted now. Do you believe that he murdered the two little girls?
Yes, in Toronto, yes.
And one of them had her feet cut off, didn't she? They found them buried in the cellar of that house. One had her feet cut off because she had a club foot. Is this correct?
I'm not sure about that. I heard that the bodies were chopped up into pieces to fit inside trunks.
Yeah, that's right. He murdered her. I heard that they put the little girls in the trunk and then gassed them inside the trunk with a pipe going through to the trunk.
See, the difficult part, Irene, about that whole part of the story is he was only tried for one murder in Philadelphia of Ben Peitzel. So all this other, story, all this other legend, it's not evidence that would be admissible in a court of law. Yeah. So, the doubters have their way. They can get up and say that Holmes, you can't prove he murdered those two little girls. You can't. All I know was he was seen with the two little girls before they disappeared. And he murdered their father. And there was an association involved, which surely makes it convenient to at least consider, Mark, that this is what happened.
Now, just to touch back on the Ghost Adventures episode real quick, which I always admit to people, it's my guilty pleasure show. I love watching the show from an entertainment standpoint, and I do believe it's one of the few shows that really they genuinely, at least in their mind, they're not faking anything. They're presenting things that they are experiencing. Now, their interpretation of it and Zach's showmanship being a little over the top, and you take it with a huge grain of salt, but. For the most part, compared to a lot of the other shows out there, it's still the one that I'll tune into and it entertains me. That being said, when they were there at the house and they interviewed the one woman, Jeff, can you offer any explanation on what the hell that woman was wearing?
I never saw it, so I don't know.
She was dressed as a little girl.
Oh, come on.
Yes.
I didn't have anything to do with that. I know that your comments were quite common on Facebook, and my friend Alan Hunter, who's her friend that was on the show as well, he got very defensive about it. And she had been a veteran in Iraq with the United States Army.
Okay.
And she came home with PTSD.
Okay.
And evidently that outfit that she was wearing is something that connects very deep inside her. And I know Alan was very upset for people. Zach could have done a better job, Mark, of explaining her condition and why she was dressed like that.
Was she dressed in period costume?
No, she was dressed.
Girl, or was she dressed as a little girl of today?
She was dressed like a little girl today with pigtails. The room was overly pink. It was very. But now, Jeff, you know what? You explain it this way. First and foremost, I almost should be ashamed of myself because I am judging and looking at somebody doing something rather strange and going WTF. But you explained it that way. I take a big step back and I apologize for my comments, because understanding veterans and PTSD and what they've gone through, and sometimes people need to express themselves in certain ways in order to deal with the things that they've gone through. So that being said, and anybody I may have offended out there, I apologize. Still,
well, I should imagine that's the story with this lady's case, but over here we get a lot of people dress up as schoolgirls.
No.
But that's because they're eccentric,
But But there's still, with that episode was still very, very interesting, and they were getting a lot of evidence, paranormal evidence. Now, some of it they were trying to attribute to Holmes, which I thought that they were really stretching it, because let's face it, how much time did he really spend in that house, and would his ghost have any connection to it whatsoever? Howard Peitzel being a totally different story if he was murdered in that house. But it's still, it was a very interesting show, and I was happy to see that when they had you on and they did promote your book. And overall, I thought the episode was still fairly well done. And one of the things that I noticed too, and you having been on television, Jeff, you understand this. What gets filmed and what winds up on TV, you have no idea what's going to wind up.
Well, the best part's usually on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
I tell you, there was a scene, Mark and Irene, where Zach and I were sitting at the dining room table. It was after midnight. The room was totally dark, and the book was between Zach and I on the table. And I saw the book. It actually moved. And I asked Zach, I said, "Did you see that?" And he said, No. And I said, well, make sure the camera stays on. So there's something strange going on in the room here. And they cut it. We went outside, and Zach came out to me later and admitted that he'd seen it too. So I was really surprised when the episode didn't include that scene on the show.
Yeah, I've heard of this before, of other shows that they actually have really good evidence that they capture at the time of filming, and then for whatever reason it just doesn't make it into the episode, whether they want to claim time or I don't know.
It's whoever's editing it at the time. When I done the last television show I done, half of it ended up on the cutting room floor, and what wasn't put into the show I thought was very good evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're dealing with producers, it's hard. They don't understand, especially if they're not coming from the paranormal world. They put in what they want to put in, or they'll put a spin on it. And I've had some negative experiences where I was on a show once where they faked stuff. Which embarrassed me because, they were at one of my clients' house that they were having real paranormal activity. They were very afraid, and yet they screwed around. They faked some things. The show host, who I won't name, was doing cocaine in my client's bathroom. I mean, it was just a complete and utter mess. And then, I've had run-ins with other producers on other shows who they're interviewing me, and then during my interview, they're trying to get me to change my story. And I'm going, no, I'm not going to change my story. Well, guess what? I got cut from the episode because I wouldn't change my story to suit them. So, I can be a little cynical sometimes when it comes to TV. And again, for the American Ripper show, which I thought was very well done, and the research that was put into it, I thought that was one of the better efforts that History had put out in a while.
Well, thank you very much. I consider the historical recreations they did some of the best ever in television history. And the actor that played H.H. Holmes / Jack the Ripper was just incredible.
You know what? For me, and this is just my personal opinion, the guy who played Holmes, to me, didn't look enough like Holmes, where in the Ghost Adventures episode, the guy they hired looked more like Holmes. And I know that at one point, Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio were looking into making first a movie, and then it was talking about some kind of television series that would be based on Devil in the White City about Holmes. And DiCaprio might have played him. I know you had been talking about this for over a long period of time, and then the project, I guess, just seemed to have fallen apart. But if there's like a modern actor who I think looks a lot like Holmes and would pull him off Spitting Image, it would be Tom Hardy. Are you familiar?
Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy.
Huh?
Yeah.
You're not the first to bring him up, Mark. I can tell you this though, and this is about as far as I can go being under contract. There is a major motion picture about H.H. Holmes coming out, and the success that this Joker movie is having. And then having Holmes to play the real life Joker in portraying the story is really exciting a lot of Hollywood executives.
Well, that's where
I look forward to that one.
Yeah, that's again where this whole idea of these anti-hero serial killer, twisted individuals being the star of the show. There's a great appeal and there's an audience for it right now. And again, like the show Mindhunter, they're showing some of the very twisted people that the FBI was interviewing and chasing after back there in the 70s and early 80s. People have a fascination for that. So
I agree. I think when you look at the cable television, channel directory, you're seeing more and more paranormal, more and more true crime, and combinations of the two, and then of course serial killer shows.
In fact, I have to laugh at the Travel Channel because, Travel Channel, they've stopped traveling and now it's all paranormal shows, especially now through the month of October. And, although, they still have Josh Gates' show Expedition Unknown, which he's traveling all over the world. And, that's pretty cool. But yeah, it's all paranormal is really big right now. And it's just a shame that most of those shows bore me because being a real paranormal investigator, I know what's real, I know what's not, and I know how they sometimes put the spin on things to try to make things scarier. Because in most paranormal investigations, you sit there for hours and nothing happens. Yeah, that doesn't make for great television.
I was recently in a ghost hunt at the Binions in Las Vegas, upstairs in the hall, on the floor that the hotel has outlawed any rooms from being rented. Because of alleged hauntings, and we did a ghost hunt. My first actual official ghost hunt, and to tell you the truth, I enjoyed it a lot, Mark, but came up with absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and it's those times usually you're sitting there and nothing happens, and it's after the fact where if you go back and review your audio and your video or your photos, then you realize something happened, and you pick it up. I've caught in so many great pieces of evidence over the years, whether it's EVP or anomalies on video. I've been posting, if you also follow me on Facebook, you'll see I've been posting some old videos of some of the evidence I've caught over the years for just in the spirit of Halloween. I lived in a house for a while that had some activity, which is what got me into this when I first moved here to New Jersey. But yeah, it's the media's fascination with it now with, like you mentioned, the Joker movie, which is just like making a killing, pardon the pun, at the box office. And they're already talking about a sequel. So I could see if there's something major about H.H. Holmes coming out, I could see that. Hopefully it's very well done. And I'd like to see a dramatic version of that story. And I'd like to see how they take it, too, considering some of the stranger aspects to the Holmes story. And one of the more controversial sides of the story. But before we get into that, Irene, you had a question?
Yeah, I do, actually. It's one of these girly questions, Jeff. Now, if I knew, or even when I see a photograph of my great-grandmother, I scrutinize that picture and myself to see if there is any likeness. Now, the photographs of H.H. Holmes that are out there, they're true likenesses. Are they actual photographs of him?
Oh, I have the original, his class photo graduating from the University of Michigan.
Okay, and have you scrutinized it against your own face to see whether there is anything, like the eyes or the nose or the mouth?
Oh, about 1 million times.
And is there?
I don't notice it. I have people tell me there is, but I don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it? Well, it's just something that I would do. And I have done in the past when I've come across old photographs of relations and one thing or another. I've actually looked deep into the photograph, then to my own face, and to see if there is anything at all.
Well, see, and that brings up an interesting subject, though, Irene. You're into a part of the story which more and more people are starting to realize. When you go back to those newspaper accounts Got the Philadelphia, New York, the Boston paper saying, we don't recognize this guy at trial. This isn't the photographs we saw from other stories before. And then you have Holmes's doctor saying, you know, when I inspected him at prison that day, he was different than he had looked to me before. And then you have Holmes in his memoirs, Irene, stating, when I looked at the mirror, there was something different looking back at me, something demonic. And then all of a sudden, we now think that he wasn't executed that day. I think it's all part of the fraud.
So either he was a great hypnotist where he hypnotized everyone to think that this other poor fellow was actually him, or he escaped and they didn't want to let it out that he had escaped, maybe. Or, I don't know. I've got to do it. I will find that. Do it.
Well, this was the man who was the master at defrauding insurance companies of life insurance policies.
Yeah, he was a brilliant cons man.
Brilliant.
Now, with that, and as I mentioned just before we broke there, you know, one of the more controversial things about Holmes and about your book and claims, and I know it stirs up a big hornet's nest with folks over in the UK, is the fact that you feel very strongly and have a lot of evidence that points to Holmes being actual Jack the Ripper, which annoys Brits to no end to think that their Jack the Ripper might be an American.
No, I've solved Jack the Ripper. That mystery's over. I just have to see if I can talk open-minded ripperologists to take a look at the evidence, because I'll tell you both. When we were filming in London, I had a couple of Scotland Yard detectives come up to me in the hotel lobby and state that they'd long thought that there was at least one copycat involved, and that the 5 killings, the canonical 5 that had been 130 years in history, they disagreed with for quite a long time. So when they heard about my theory about this well-educated American who, trying to sound English, wrote "Dear Boss," they were very interested about it. Now I got to tell you, I've no doubts. I just think the world has to come around to considering the evidence without getting, Mark, like you just described, so angry about it. And they just need to. You should have seen when I gave my TED talk about Holmes being the Ripper. We had 2,500 people speechless. The host gave them mechanical devices to electronically vote at the end of my presentation, and we came up with 77% of the crowd thinking the evidence had proven Holmes was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. Can I just explain who the Canonical 5 are?
Yeah.
Okay. Annie Chapman, Mary Ann Nichols, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. They're the 5 that they know was done by the Ripper. There was murders before that they can't put down to the Ripper, and there was murders after that they could not put down to the Ripper.
Well,
that could have been copycat, or they could, could have.
Irene, should we share with Jeff your connection?
No.
No? Why not?
Because not just sharing with Jeff, sharing with
we're sharing, but it's in your. Well, you might as well. It's in your book.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd like cross-examine Irene about the canonical 5.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, I wanted to just bring this up because Irene herself is an author. She's written 3 books. One of them, her first book, nonfiction, is called Life Among the Spirits. And,
I can never remember the name of it.
Because it was just Among the Spirits for a while, and then we changed it to Life Among the Spirits. But in the book, how old were you at the time?
Oh, I was a young girl looking for work. I was working up at Spitalfields Market.
Yeah.
In the East End. And
you had that experience that day.
Yeah, I did.
Can you tell us about that?
No, you wanted to tell the story. You tell the story.
Well, I don't remember the whole story and how exactly it came about, but you saw the woman, the ghost.
I went out. I was working up at Spitalfields Market. This was back in the 70s. And before I got to the job that I finally got to. And I was looking for modeling jobs, dancing jobs and things like that. Anyway, I'd been out of work for a little while, and somebody had told me that they'd got a lorry that they wanted to sell that was parked up at Spitalfields Market. And if I wanted to earn some money, I could go up there and clean it all up for them. This was a big lorry, you know.
That's a bus for the American audiences. That's a bus for American audiences.
Well, it was like is it? Oh, well, a lorry, it's a truck.
Yes.
Truck type thing, yeah. Open back. This lorry was. And I went up there and I was cleaning it up. It took about 2 weeks. And in the meantime, every time I had a lunch break, I went off to find somewhere to eat and also keep an eye out for a job. And I was walking down Hanbury Street. Now you can take it, Mark.
No, continue. You're doing so well.
And I felt I was being watched. This was about, it was during the lunchtime. I felt I was being watched. There didn't seem to be anyone about. There was maybe a person right down the street, further on down, and just trotting around. But I kept getting this feeling I was being watched. Anyway, I went back and... let me see, I'm going to get it straight again. I went back to work and I went back down there a couple of days later looking for somewhere to eat because I didn't have much money and I wanted something cheap to eat. And I walked back down this road again and I felt again that I was being watched. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I turned around and there was a Victorian woman standing there. And she had a green scarf on, I believe, if I was right. And she was just standing there and she put her hand out. She just put her hand out to me. And I knew she was a ghost. I just knew it. So I looked around the street. Obviously, no one was about. No one could see me. So I started talking. And she turned around and she said to me that she'd been strangled before she had been cut. That was her words. And then that was the end of it. A couple of months went by and everything, and I was in the pub. Oh, she stunk a drink as well. I was in the pub, and no, let me get this right. I went to a library, and for some reason or other, I was led to a book of Jack the Ripper. I took it home, got a telling off of my dad, and I really didn't read it. But a couple of months later, I was in the pub, and the smell of the booze in the pub brought it back to me. And what I believe that I actually saw Annie Chapman. And the hand, the story is, or what I found out since, was she had an old brass ring or something on her hand, which was taken. And I think that's why she had her hand out. But when I was talking to her, and I said to her one word, well, a couple of words, "It's all right, I understand." And that was it. She just vanished.
Very cool story.
Yes, indeed.
Very interesting.
But, yes, and then I found out about 2 years ago, I think it was, I was reading something that was written by some detective or something, and it was never put out, but apparently there'd been an attempt on strangulation on her before her throat had been cut. No, I didn't know that.
Huh.
So, did I see Annie Chapman? I don't know. It was a Victorian woman dressed in Victorian clothes from that period, and it was Hanbury Street. I didn't look around to see what numbers. I think the house had been demolished anyway, but I didn't look around to see exactly what buildings were there at the time, you know, what the numbers of the buildings were or anything. So, I don't know. But I like to think it was Annie Chapman. And there is more to that story.
Which you can read in your book.
To it that I've just cut out.
Life Among the Spirits.
Yeah.
There is a lot. We plug your book.
I just cut it short, but she kept on. Oh, I kept seeing a fountain as well, and it turned out that she had a brother whose name was Fountain.
Interesting.
You know?
Mark, you need to have Irene on as a guest. That fascinated me.
Getting her to talk about her own experiences is like pulling teeth. So we're lucky we got her to talk about this one.
Yeah, I only wrote them down for the grandchildren, really. I wrote that book mainly for the grandchildren, so that they'd know who I was and what my life was like.
Yep.
From a little girl. So.
Yeah, we'll have to do a show on you then next, Irene. You'll be our guest.
Oh, I'm boring. I'm boring.
But getting back to with Holmes as the Ripper, now the evidence that you had presented not only in your book Bloodstains, but also on the American Ripper, which I found very compelling, was the fact that, Holmes used a lot of different aliases, and those aliases were on a ship's manifest going to England at just before the time of the Ripper killings, and that also he was under a lot of lawsuits. He was doing a bunch of lawsuits against him at the time, and they were all put on hold for how many months was that? It was that coincided again with the Ripper killings before he came back.
I intended to do so, and the producers allowed me that. Amaryllis took over that part of the show, Mark, because I knew the skeptics would see me on it and just throw it out the window, and that her credibility, having worked with the CIA as an investigator, might give the show the legs it needed. And she ran down the aliases he used on the passenger list to go to London. So I thought that part of the show came off very well. The other part that came off very well about Holmes being the Ripper were the two English linguists who studied the Dear Boss letter, which, I know that there are many, many Ripperologists who believe the Dear Boss letter was a hoax, a journalistic hoax.
This is the one with the bloodstains on it, is it?
No, that's the Saucy Jack postcard, I think.
Yeah, I saw that. I've seen that.
Yeah, and really, when you talk about evidence, Irene, the Dear Boss and Saucy Jack are pretty much all you have in Jack the Ripper, other than the autopsy reports.
What about you see? This is one letter I haven't seen. It's from hell, and it was to George Lusk, who was the head of the Vigilantes at the time.
I've seen that letter. I don't think it's written by the same hand that wrote Dear Boss.
Yeah, and then enclosed with this letter was half a human kidney.
Yes.
And he did take a kidney. Who was it he took the kidney from? Wait a minute. I've got some notes here. Oh, Kathy Eddowes. He took her left kidney.
Well, and a part of her ear, too.
But before we go any further... Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right.
You continue, and then I'll just read out what was done to the actual victims by the Ripper.
Well, yeah. Well, and that's that MO thing which people try to connect the murders together with, although it wouldn't be admissible in a court of law in America as far as a murder trial. So what I try to ask people, what similarities? Now, I agree that
I see the similarities.
Okay, let me get this. The same man killed Chapman and Nichols. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Mary Kelly, it's a gory, gruesome murder, okay?
Yeah,
but it has nothing in common with the other murders.
Well, that was actually in her own digs where she lived. So
that's right.
Yeah,
that's
it wasn't on the street.
So that is circumstantial that she was killed by the same man. Because of the chaos that was involved, that London was involved in during the newspapers reporting the murders. Now, the other one, Irene, I'd like to get your opinion about is I've always had doubts about whether a man could have killed Elizabeth Stride and then ran across to the scene of Catherine Eddowes and had enough time to do both?
Well, let's see, where were they now? Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes killed in the early morning on the 30th of September 1988. Stride's body was found in Dutfield's yard. One cut to the throat severed the main artery on the left side of her neck. No mutilations to the abdomen. So he could have been disturbed, like they said. And who was Cathy Eddowes?
Catherine Eddowes.
Mitre square. Throat severed. Abdomen ripped open by long, jagged wounds. Left kidney and part of the uterus removed. And her bloody apron was found at Goulston Street, where the graffiti on the wall implicated the Jews. Also, her face was mutilated.
Right. And I'm a firm believer that the man who wrote Dear Boss murdered Catherine Eddowes. He wasn't a journalist in a hoax. Now, the interesting part about the show, Mark, was while we were in the London Museum, the curator there agreed with me that the same man that wrote Dear Boss also wrote the Saucy Jack postcard. And he also admitted that the police had withheld the newspapers from publishing Dear Boss for 3 days. And that in between those 3 days of the Dear Boss and the Saucy Jack postcard, Catherine Eddowes was murdered. Yeah. That description of the murder scene in Saucy Jack, the curator agreed with me, had to have been written by the man who either committed the murder or who was there. And I've always found that extremely fascinating. And I've offered to debate this with ripperologists for years. And as you mentioned, Mark, they tend to get very, very angry about their theories, their suspects, and any questions involving the viability of the evidence they're using to come up with their conclusion.
Oh yeah, we have. There's a couple of people we know personally who, when I've tried talking to them before about Holmes being the Ripper, and the two words that always comes out is utter rubbish. They just don't want to hear it. It's utter rubbish.
Well, I think you've got to keep an open mind on it. You really have.
Yeah, well,
Elizabeth Stride, she was killed at Dutfield's yard. Now, I'm not sure exactly, but her body she was killed about 1 o'clock in the morning. And about 1:30, they found Catherine Eddowes, didn't they, at Mitre Square? Now, I'm not sure how far away that is, but that is it must be some move. He must have been able to get from one place to the other pretty quick if it was him.
That's always raised doubts in my mind. He would have had to have either ridden a horse or trolley or ran across town and then committed the murder. And the possibility, Irene, that he wouldn't have been observed, acting frantic in order to commit those two murders was highly unlikely. So while, once again, my theory is circumstantial. And also the point you brought up, there was no mutilation of the abdomen, and there was not a sliced throat through and through as in the other murders. So I've always had my doubts about Elizabeth Stride.
Yeah, she just had a cut throat, which severed the main artery on her neck. No mutilations, nothing to the abdomen.
And then all of London, every day was looking forward to reading the next article about Jack the Ripper. Yeah.
But also in those days, the majority of the murders were either cutthroats or strangulation.
Still today in America, there was a report the other day, Mark, about how there are more murders with knives than with guns in America.
Yeah, definitely. So it could have been anyone that done that. It could have been a jealous boyfriend, anyone.
Well, the other thing that fascinated me was in the research that you did in both in the book and the show was the fact that there were some Ripper-style murders that happened in the United States after the Jack the Ripper murders ceased, and when it was clear Holmes was back in the U.S. In fact, a couple of the cities where these happened, I think you were able to track down that Holmes was in those cities around that time.
That's an amazing piece of evidence, Mark, that we can't get any of the Ripperologists to consider. And Amaryllis found this with an ex-Chicago detective on the show, Mark Johnson. They went and researched the archives, and they found bodies that the Chicago police had written off as suicides. And lo and behold, they had sliced necks and mutilated abdomens. They were found along the lake there alongside Chicago.
Now, with that, let's take a look at this for a moment. From what you know of Holmes and all the research he did, if he was in fact Jack the Ripper, okay, and he did do these mutilations, I believe I remember what you were hinting at in the book, but why do you think he went to such an extreme with these killings? That there were a couple that happened in the U.S., but it didn't seem to be his main M.O. What do you think he was trying to accomplish?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for that other than he was on vacation. He was in London.
That's it right there.
He was
working vacation.
Yeah. He was on vacation. He had been reading in the papers about the Nichols and Chapman murders. Yeah. He came up with the Dear Boss letter, which is where the first mention of the phrase Jack the Ripper ever occurred. He sent it to the proper media authorities, which most normal human beings wouldn't have even known how to do. When the police didn't allow the press to print his letter, he got upset and he murdered Catherine Eddowes. And that, I know the theory is out there. I know I have no proof for it other than the fact when we ran that Dear Boss letter through the computer program at the University of Buffalo, the Cedar Fox program, which the FBI uses to compare handwriting analysis, it came back with a 97% number for Holmes correspondence. And to me, you can't just turn the other cheek at that. You've got to consider.
That is very good. That is basically it, isn't it? 90% evidence.
Well, Mark,
97% evidence.
And Mark, you've seen the overlay that I put on the Facebook page with yours truly, very truly yours,
yes,
and how amazingly similar. I mean, you don't have to be a handwriting expert to look at those letters and see they're similar.
Yeah. The only thing that I find different is that, it's a well-known fact that Jack the Ripper was a stalker. He stalked his victims, and yet with Holmes, he lured them.
You're absolutely correct.
But with Holmes...
Why would he suddenly change?
Being in a foreign city, maybe?
Change his ways.
I don't know. All I know is that when the Scotland Yard investigators come up to me in the hotel lobby and say that they found my theory very fascinating, and they'd long believed there had been at least one copycat with the 5 murders.
Yeah.
I took that. They boosted my confidence quite high.
Mm.
Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but Holmes had an accomplice that worked with him, and it was Peitzel, I believe, wasn't it? The boy's father.
He had
Benjamin.
He had 3 or 4 accomplices at given times.
Okay, and there was a thought that one of the Ripper murders might have even been attributed to one of his accomplices.
That was Benjamin Peitzel, wasn't it? The carpenter.
Could have been. I don't have any evidence for that, we know that when Amaryllis checked the passenger list, it appeared that 2 men went over together from New York to Southampton. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, after in 1989, there was 4 more murders. That couldn't be put down to the Ripper.
1989, I would think not. That was 100 years later. You mean 1889?
Yeah, 1889. You know, they were copycat murders as well. There was Rose Myler. She was strangled. Alice Mackenzie, who's my namesake. Throat cut, severing the artery. The Pinchin Street torso, which was a headless corpse, and also the legs were cut off. And Frances Cole, in 1891, that was some time after, her throat cut, and her body was mutilated. So I think there was a lot of copycats afterwards.
Copycats seem to appear at many given times after every serial killer is illustrated in the press, so that the story is told, and these sick men, they see that the publicity excites them and entices them to try to do something similar. I guess I'm not a psychiatrist, but that seems to be, what science accepts.
Yeah. Well, if the killer's never caught or never found out there was no one that could find out who the killer was, well, what a better thing to do? Take the place of the killer and do the copycat murder, especially if you get off on it.
Well, I remember, I grew up in Los Angeles, so I remember the Night Stalker killings, Richard Ramirez, when that was going on. And that was really, scared the hell out of people for a long time until they finally caught him. So I understand, being as part of the public when these killings are happening and going around. Usually a lot of these serial killers, you don't find out till after the fact when they get caught for doing one killing, and then it's suddenly revealed that hey, they've been doing a lot of killing over the years. So it becomes more of a surprise, where Ramirez, he was breaking into people's homes and raping and torturing them and killing them, and that was big news at the time.
Yeah, but it's very rarely that they change their MO. And to go from a lurer to a stalker is unusual.
No, you're absolutely correct. I when that is brought up, I have to admit, my theory has holes in it, except for when you read the trial transcript of Holmes at his murder trial and how he was seen studying the rules of procedure and evidence at the stand, at his table, while the prosecutor was presenting the case. You've got a man, Irene, who's intelligent enough to know that similar MOs will result in him being put in prison and executed eventually, and that for him to change an MO wouldn't have been that hard for that type of man.
Maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe you're right. We had a series of killings. You're talking about killings, actually, in California. Back in the 70s in Glasgow, Bible John was his name. And he used to kill prostitutes. He used to preach the Bible to them first, though. They never found out who he was either. They suddenly stopped.
Yikes. Yeah.
And people just surmised that he died or something like that, And
that you bring up an interesting aspect to what makes Holmes so different. And his murders, and Mark will help me with this, but his murders mostly involved people interfering with his ability to make more money.
Yeah.
Where the murder, when you talk about Gacy and Bundy and Ramirez, you're talking about the psychotic killers who were fascinated with having blood on their hands and hearing the screams of their innocent victims, where Holmes was interested in making money. And I think that's what makes him the unique serial killer of all time.
Yeah, whether he was making money through selling the skeletons or body parts, or whether he was actually making money through insurance scams. Yeah, you're right. It was all about money. At the end of the day, at the bottom of it all was money.
Well, like even with the Murder Castle, how he wormed his way in. It used to be a pharmacy, I believe, correct? That building was a pharmacy, and the people who owned it, he conned them, wormed his way in until he got rid of them, took it over himself, and then that's where he built his hotel in what was now called the Murder Castle. And now I believe I've been reading that I know you've been trying for years to get some kind of excavation done on the property there, or are you anywhere closer to meeting, getting permission to do more research on the property?
Did they not just demolish it then? Didn't they demolish it?
Yeah, it's a post office now.
They never took it to the ground and rebuilt it then?
If parts of the basement still exist, don't they, Jim?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to do some ground radar, Mark, and determine how much of the foundation still exists. But the post office was set aside 99%, and there's a plot of land next to it, which the Murder Castle stood upon. And when the federal government bought the property in 1937, they tore the Murder Castle down and built the post office, which I'm reminding them now was a violation of federal law, because the murders that had been committed there, allegedly committed there, were never properly investigated. And the federal government had an obligation to do that. So I've begun the process. I've written 2 or 3 documents already. I have some refusals that have come back. And we're in the process now of scheduling meetings with the authorities to try to remind them that federal laws were violated, that these victims deserve an investigation. And if they're identified, we need to find out how the murders were committed, and then to let the people following them know that the government did the right thing here. And that's why I'm excited about it, Mark. I've done this before. When I went to have the grave exhumed, about 99% of America said that I'd never have it happen. It would never occur. I could never get the okay. And they're saying the same thing now, Mark. And I'll stick with it. And eventually, I'll have it happen, and I'll get one of the fine Chicago universities in anthropology to help me with the excavation. And then we'll identify the DNA that's still there, I'm convinced of. And hopefully, Irene, when we dig that ground up and do it scientifically, we might find evidence connecting Holmes to those other murders we were just talking about.
Yeah, could well do. But these people, you're right, these people do need laying to rest properly. They deserve that. They deserve that.
Who would want to be buried there?
That's it.
Anonymity. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of buried, I want to go back to Holmes's grave for a second, because the fact that they did what they did to bury him so far, buried under concrete, and wasn't there like a false bottom as well, and when you guys were digging up what was thought to be the grave, that there was something, you had to go much deeper, there was like concrete over concrete?
One of the great scenes of the show, we dug down the plot. We found out that he had bought 2 plots, Mark. The first plot, we dug down the 8 feet, the normal depth of graves, and we came across the coffin, but it was empty. Okay, so you can imagine my joy. I'm jumping up and down. There's an empty coffin there. So my theories have been proven right. Ha ha ha. And Amaryllis, no. We've got all this equipment here. We've got all these engineers here. Let's go over. Let's take the next plot down. Let's go deeper. Let's go, like Irene said, the 10 feet. And that's when we found the concrete sarcophagus. So not only was there a body buried in concrete, but there was a fake coffin next to it in the plot that's on the official records.
Oh. When you said that, Mark, I thought you meant he had a back door down to hell. When you said there was a gap underneath. But
strange enough, the concrete was not underneath him; it was on the top of him. So Irene, you could be right.
Yeah, well, when you think about these Egyptian tombs and everything, and they're like concrete, I can now people don't laugh at me. I'm going to say the word sarcophagus. So, I cannot say it, but how many times when they open them up, the body is practically still preserved. A lot of the hair is still there and everything. Surely, I know they're embalmed and everything, but surely the concrete or the cement must do something to preserving that body, like you said. It was how many years before you dug him up? How many years ago was he buried before? How long had he been in there? And he still smelt?
121 years.
121 years, yeah. And the pong was still there. And he still had his moustache and bits of hair and clothing.
His clothing, hat. Yeah.
Yeah. It was still preserved. So concrete does do things. It does really weird things.
What were you about to say, Jeff, before that?
Well, both of you take this on for size. When we were digging and we came to the proper grave, we found a large, maybe 14 inches long, maybe 8 inches wide pewter cross. All right. And on the cross, it had the date of the execution and then the name H.H. Holmes. Now, before the execution, the day before, Holmes had converted to Catholicism. He had confessed his sins and he had begged forgiveness from the Lord. Now, what are the chances are that this con man, this fraud, this fake of all times would have put his alias on that cross instead of his birth name?
Herbert Mudgett. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Makes you think, doesn't it?
Now, what do you think? Do you think that was really him, or was it did he really convert to Catholicism? And if so, he never did anything without a reason for it, and he certainly never felt any guilt or remorse. Yeah, what would be your thoughts on why he would do something like that?
Oh, I think he was laughing about it. It's a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he could do all these bad things, at the end just convert to Catholicism, beg for forgiveness, and then go to heaven.
Yeah, the man did not think that way, Mark.
Yeah.
He did not.
No. No,
unless
it's like you said, unless, like you said, which is actually a very demonic type trait, is a mockery.
Well, and if you believe those things, are you really going to make a joke before you see God, our Lord? Mm-hmm. I doubt it. I doubt it. But I've always been puzzled by that, and I hope Hollywood takes off running with it.
We have about 10 minutes left here, Jeff. One of the things I wanted to ask you, after writing the book, and you got to do the American Ripper show, and learning about all of this, you're doing all this research. Is there anything that you discovered after writing the book, any theories that you had on Holmes, where now you could admit you were wrong, or you weren't right on what you originally supposed? Yes.
In the book, I still my belief that he is Jack the Ripper, but now I only believe he murdered Catherine Eddowes. The others were not victims of Holmes, and I was wrong about that.
Do you think he could have been the copycat, and there was a Jack the Ripper?
Yes, that's exactly, and he's the one that coined the phrase Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Irene. The other fact, Mark, was when I wrote the book, I had an completely honest belief that he murdered many, many, many scores of innocent young women at the World's Fair. All right. Now I tend to believe it was probably in the 15 to 25 range. I think he did a lot of work with cadavers. They used to dig up graves after they had been freshly buried, and they would strip the flesh and sell those skeletons. And they found that just much less risky than a murder.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the authorities had little care for that, I would imagine. And he probably had a team of assistants that were just pros at it. So there's the story continues evolving. I'm a firm believer in that this was the most incredible escape from prison and execution. He walked right out the front doors in American history. And I'm convinced that one day we're going to get to tell that story to a world with an open mind that finally considers what actually happened.
Now, with that revelation and what you think might have actually happened, do you think he was still using the murder castle itself with the rooms, the gas rooms, the body chutes? Since it doesn't survive today, how much do we really know of what it truly existed? Were there blueprints, or was there anything to show that this is what he actually built? Or was it those are the stories, but maybe he was still using the basement for, like you said, taking care of cadavers to sell to the medical universities?
He also had an oven in there, didn't he?
A crematorium, yes.
Yeah.
With 6,000 degrees, which is enough to cremate a body. Yeah. So, you know what, Mark? There were newspaper accounts, there were police reports, private investigators went into the basement. Those are what we're left with. As far as blueprints, there are drawings. I wouldn't say blueprints. And then Holmes's accounts, who you've got anything you read that Holmes wrote, Mark and Irene, is more than likely a lie. I don't even know if he knew what the truth was at the end. When he convinced himself of a fact, he probably was a believer. And, so anything he wrote, you've got to take with a grain of salt, maybe a jar of salt. And yeah. So but we have police accounts, we have newspaper reports, we have the Hearst Corporation writing, we have the Philadelphia papers writing his confessions and their accounts of visiting the murder castle. So, that's what we're left with. I know, people want to go both sides of those arguments, and they probably largely will for the rest of the time. But I continue falling back on the many, many people that were associated with him that just went missing. And it's not a coincidence. There's too many of them.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't it that his one partner, Peitzel, was, if I remember correctly, and I don't remember if this was in the show or the book or both, but, he wanted to do an insurance fraud and fake his death. And Holmes
wanted him to do it, didn't he?
Well, Holmes actually killed him to get the money for himself so he wouldn't have to split it with him.
Yeah.
There's probably 10 theories on Ben Peitzel's quote-unquote death and whether he actually even died. His body was identified by one of his daughters at the morgue. She did so stating that she recognized her father's teeth. I find that unusual.
Unless he's got really weird teeth.
True.
It'd be very hard.
But then I asked the doubters to provide me any evidence whatsoever of Ben Peitzel having been identified or recognized ever again after that, and there's nothing. There's nothing.
Now, he was a bigamist. He was married, about 5 times, one legally, and then the rest. But did he ever kill any of these wives?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd have to go through my list to get you the exact. A couple of them lived. He didn't. He could have murdered them, and he didn't. But I think 2 of them. One was found. The body was found, and one went again missing, and never came up. And you have to remember, Mark, that during his trial, this was the O.J. Simpson trial at the time. This was huge news. any of those women, any of those quote unquote wives, as a matter of fact, 2 of them testified against him, any of those women would have presented themselves to the newspapers or been identified by the newspapers to, to discuss Holmes and his antics. So it's the story, as I told you, the story evolves practically every day. I've no doubt that he is a mass murdering serial killer who was psychotic, who was evil, and who considered money more valuable than human life. And I think that's enough for us to tell the H.H. Holmes story.
Well, again, as we're coming up here on the end of the show, I'm looking forward. You hinted that there may be something big in the works to finally bring that story to a much more mass audience. I definitely would look forward to that because, I have a fascination with Holmes. I'm not one of these people who normally is fascinated by serial killers, but being that when you get into the mind of somebody like this who is so opposite of who you are, you couldn't even conceive of half the things that this person could do to another human being. I mean, I can't even hurt. I love animals, and I couldn't hurt a fly. And I genuinely try to be a good spiritual person to understand that type of evil really does exist in the world. People can sit there and say, "Oh, well, human beings are basically good." It's and then there's some of the bad apples, and sometimes I think. I don't know. I think sometimes we fluctuate as a species back and forth so much, and there's so many different gray areas that I can't sit here and honestly say we're genuinely good, except for the odd ones like Holmes.
Well, and I think you're both right on the money. I think this is more than just defining a man as a serial killer who was evil and psychotic. There was something more to this man, and I think we're on the right track to maybe identifying that one day. And while the word demonic is out there, there's something different about this guy that we haven't identified yet. And I think it may come up one day. There's a scene in American Ripper, Irene, that never leaves me. I'll have it on my dying day. It's Holmes holding the little boy's hand, Howard, in Irvington, with his satchel in the other hand, his doctor's satchel, and he's dressed finely. He's a very dapper gentleman, and he walked the boy and his satchel to the downtown blacksmith so that the scalpels could be sharpened for the next day's murder.
Oh, jeez.
And that to me is something else. That's just too much.
Well, that is sick.
Well, Jeff, we have come to the end of the show, and what a riveting, fascinating show it's been. So where can people find your book, Bloodstains?
If anybody Googles Bloodstains or Jeff Mudgett, we're top of the list now. So we're right up there on the page, but you can go to bloodstainsthebook.com. If you'd like a signed copy, you've got to contact me personally so I can help you with that. But I got to tell you, the interesting thing happening now is I'm starting to get comments from people who are expressing experiences while they read the book. And many of the famous ghost hunters you see on TV now have bought copies of the book, and they're including it in their toolboxes on their ghost hunts now. So it's getting to be quite widely known, and I'm really excited about that.
Wow.
That's interesting. Very interesting. Well, I certainly will get the book.
Yep.
I'll order it tomorrow, Jeff.
I started rereading my copy. I've had it for a few years. I'm rereading it already. Again, I really recommend it, folks. If you pick it up, it's a riveting read. You won't be disappointed. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. This has been great.
Okay, Jeff, don't go away, will you?
Yeah, hold on real quick.
I hope I haven't let you and your listeners down.
No, you haven't.
Oh, no way. That was it. That was through that rip. Well, I'm gobsmacked.
Okay. Well, we got to wrap this up. So, everyone, thank you for tuning in to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. You can also download us every Wednesday. We have a new episode coming out. Plus, we stream on paranormalukradio.com. And
24/7, people.
And where else can people find us, Irene?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay. Well, have a great evening, everybody, and thank you. We'll see you all next time. Have a good week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.